Now, we actually then, this is then like, oh my God, this is the place, this is what we can do. The price, we felt like, oh, it's a good price. It was a good price, but we didn't know at that time. I just mentioned the mortgages in France. Said you can't get a mortgage in France in the same way, or at least not for a chateau at the time, and all this kind of stuff. And so like, okay, how can we finance this whole thing? How can we actually do something there? And we also said like, well, this is the first thing that we've seen. So, you kind of biased and said like, oh, I want this. And
it was the first one, but it still made a lasting impression on us. It's still one of our...
It helped us to say like, how should it be looking?
Yeah.
How should it look like? Right?
Yeah.
And what do we need from an amenity?
Our checklist got much more, because once we saw a couple places, your checklist grows, because you saw, and that place really did have
what did we have on the checklist? Do you remember?
Natural light, big windows, natural light, high ceilings. A lot of the places that you go, including the place we're at right now, the top floor used to be like the servants' quarters usually.
This is very short.
So they were always very short, and so
not short people, just
like the wall, and it felt like you were in kind of this weird like cave. Yeah. And a lot of places had that. So top floor that had higher ceilings, lots of natural light, like a little bit of symmetry in the building as far as, it doesn't have to be perfectly symmetry, but lots of natural land, hopefully some water.
The reason why we said symmetry and like a certain look from the outside is because, well, think about where we are, this Instagram kind of culture in a way. Everybody likes to share pictures of places, and we wanted to have something that actually naturally is a backdrop that people want to take a picture. And if it's nice and symmetric, then it really looks more staged, right? Other than if you have to find the right angle. So making it easy for everybody to take pictures.
Okay, yeah, that's very...
You can't remember that?
No, I mean, you got a good point. You're really going into that.
All right, so at least that's what I was thinking.
Well, what do you remember from the checklist? From the initial checklist.
So it was a large, impressive
entranceway. Impressive entranceway with the
Meaning
stairway.
you walk in and you basically already feel like, oh, I'm in a special building.
Yeah.
Because some of the entranceways was basically like a corridor. It was really dark, and then the rooms were amazing, but it was a tiny little corridor, right? So that was, so I wanted to have a big, impressive entrance.
Yeah, I think the checklist kind of grew, but that was our initial thing.
Ideally a pool or water, something with water. We said either a natural lake or a pool or river, right?
So anyway, we that was like our first thing, and it really gave us the drive to keep doing it. And so unfortunately after that, COVID hit.
Yes.
That hit, and so it really put a stop to everybody.
Well, it was a little bit of time, right? So we didn't get that, of course, the first place, and we kept looking and kept creating lists.
Yeah, we were looking online. At this point, because of what was happening, we were looking a lot online, creating lists, making our checklist a little bit better, honing in on those, and then when that kind of got a little bit loosened, that's when we really started hitting the pavement and actually seeing a lot more places in person.
And you keep in mind there's years then in between, right? So this is not something that just happens like this.
So we had a lot of time to mull it over, plan it out. Exactly, we were really excited about it. So we saw quite a few places in person.
And afterwards, right?
Yeah, afterwards. And every place was amazing. Every place would have been great. There was one or two that weren't the greatest.
There was some place that looked really interesting and was beautiful surroundings and everything. It was actually one where you have the front and it looks one way and the back looked completely different, which is really exciting.
The pictures made it look so good, and then you walked in and it was soggy.
No. I mean I don't mean that one.
Which one?
I mean the one where they had a fire and they had to redo it. So it was just completely redone. But you walk inside and going like, oh, I think they just stuck in the 90s.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that one.
Somebody had put a lot of work into that building. Everyone lot of work and a lot of money, but oh my God. Like I remember there was a...
skeleton toilet paper roll.
Skeleton toilet. There was a completely
Which is, if you're into that, that's great. But for a French chateau.
There was a red bathroom, like all painted red, like if you're sitting inside a blood cell or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, we saw a lot of places.
Yeah.
It was great.
And so that didn't work. But anyway, yeah. So we really scoured it. But that was interesting what you said. Like it hit, then it was over, and during that time, a lot of people that normally would buy an apartment in Paris decided, look, we don't know if this is happening again. We're buying no places outside of it. So people who had money, apartments in Paris are really expensive. So people who had the money would suddenly buy up those places. So instead of being on the market for 3 years, they would be on the market for a month and would be gone, or not even coming onto the market because there would be...
Well, the housing market during that whole time was everywhere.
It was crazy.
Crazy. But you're right.
That made it a little bit...
A lot of them, got snatched up.
Yeah, and so we decided to expand our
radius.
radius.
Well, also because sometimes France is, one of the things was that it was kind of overdone. I don't want to say that word. It was kind of
well, I think a lot like like especially when you're in the UK, there were like shows that came out, right? Escape to the Chateau, a Chateau DIY, and like you saw like not Instagram, YouTube channels coming up, and it suddenly feel like, oh, it's not special necessarily anymore. It's still special, I mean, but it felt like, like a lot of people doing this, and if we now do this, the concept that we really want to do may fall by the wayside, and people just think like, oh, you just bought a chateau to make it up, but the chateau is not the main part, right? The building is not the main part. The building is the anchor for a whole concept, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It was kind of a bad way to put it on my part. But anyway, we decided we kind of also we don't really have any connection with France.
Other than houses,
yeah.
It should be. Yeah.
And we also it's beautiful and stuff. We can't speak the language. We didn't have any kind of real connection. None of us had lived there or spent any real time there. And so we kind of start thinking let's maybe go somewhere that we have a little bit more of a connection with. And that's when we kind of thought about Ireland.
Well,
in between there was one place, Scotland, because
sure. But what I wanted to say is we actually had moved to Ireland, so job-wise, it kind of changed anyway. So we were already in Europe. That made it easier to go to France.
Yeah.
But we were living in Ireland already and had visited a lot of places around Ireland, just casually as holidays in a way. Right?
Yeah, and I said in the first episode, when I came here, I fell in love with it. So there was already this connection. So we were kind of this is silly to be looking in France, let's start looking more closer to home. And that's when we started shifting gears and saw quite a few places here. Like I said, there was one spot in Scotland that just looked too good to be true, the most beautiful place, but it was that was the place that was too big. It wouldn't have been, it would have been possible.
It would have been too big, but let's ignore the size of it. I think what really helped us, we arrived a little bit early. And because we arrived early, we said, let's go to the town first, that is just around the corner, and get a coffee. And that was really disappointing because that town was falling on really hard times. Even the church was boarded up, remember? Yeah. And then we came to the place, and the place from the outside was great, but it really was let down on the inside. The biggest selling point for me was the gardens.
Yeah.
They had 16 acres of perfectly manicured gardens that nobody could see, remember?
Yeah, it was private. It was bizarre.
Yeah, they hired a full-time gardener, and then somebody came in part-time all year round. The family didn't live in the place at all, just to keep the gardens up. It was kind of bizarre, right?
Yeah, it was a really beautiful place. Yeah. But that just goes in to show that you have to really take all those things into consideration. Right. Where you are, what's around it, all of that kind of plays into it. So then we started looking in Ireland. We saw some really beautiful places, but the vibe totally shifted. We went from having more of this, I guess you could call it a fairy tale chateau, to more of this Gothic, castle-y, medieval type style. And we saw some
which kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah,
because you want to be true to where it is, to the country, right? Like a French chateau style in Ireland looks gimmicky. Wouldn't really work, right? It's well, it does.
It has a big fairy tale, colorful chateau in the middle of it.
Yeah, what do people think about Ireland? Ireland has 30,000 castles, right? But Ireland castles are not castles like a chateau. They're not castles like you would find in Germany or whatever. They all have their own style.
They're full-on medieval stone.
I know, they were built to kind of with a purpose, right? They were not built as pleasure
with defense and stay alive. So we saw, like I said, quite a bit of places, and every time our checklist kept kind of evolving, and by that point we really knew exactly what we wanted. So then we came across Killoskehane.
So Killoskehane was, we mentioned that before, it was kind of on the back burner, but we came Killoskehane, obviously fell in love, and this is why we're here now, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's the story.
That's the stuff. But I do have to say, the concept, and I mentioned that we had a business plan. Well, I didn't say business plan, but spreadsheets, but basically business plan. We did amend it. So we went actually and we ran the numbers here, and of course, Ireland doesn't get as many people, but it still would make sense because our groups or people that come here will be very, very small.
Anyway, that's the story of how we got here.